Hi there. Right, we're on to the next part of this build. You'll have seen in the last one we put the frame up, and that was a huge step, and I am really happy that that went as well as it did. Now for the next part of the build, we're going to be putting the sheeting onto that framing, the bit that gives it that extra bit of strength and stability. You've got a choice with the sheeting. I've gone with 12mm or 1/4 inch OSB purely because of the price. You could go for plywood if you can get that at a better rate. You've got to make a little bit of a decision. You can go down the nail route or you can go down the screw route. I don't have a nail gun. I didn't buy one at the start, and so I'm going to go with 50mm decking screws every 6 to 8 inches into all of the studs. I'm probably going to put way more in than I actually need. Just got to remember to leave a small gap between the sheets for wood movement, 1 or 2 mil. Once that's done, we're going to finish off by putting the rafters up on the roof. And the reason that I'm rushing to get that done is because if the weather turns on me, which it looks like it will, at least then I can throw a tarp over the whole building and it won't just sink in the middle with a little bit of rainwater on it. So hopefully by the end of this, it's going to be watertight, which is a big step from just being a skeleton of a building. Now, I'm not planning on showing you every single screw, every cut and every nail going in, but just know that this is how I start every single one of the boards. I measured, I cut, and then I raised them up on these handy feet, which I made to be the exact same depth as the base that we made, so that the bottom OSB sheet will sit exactly level with the floor. Now, as proud as I am of doing those feet, I did miss off one crucial bit that adds to the height. You'll see that later. And you'll also see me duck in and out of the building to find out where each one of the studs are, because they weren't at equal intervals, and that's a little bit of a pain. And there's the bit I missed off the feet, the rubber blocks that raise the whole building off the patio. Anyway, with those on, now it's really easy to raise the OSB sheets up to exactly the right height, so I can just put in the 50mm decking screws and get them locked onto the structure. My one bit of advice on this would be mark on the OSB where your studs are, because as wide as a stud is, being about 45mm, you'll still miss it. Oh yeah, and have someone help you if you possibly can with the high ones, because as good as these gloves are, as grippy as they are, it was not as easy as I'm making it look right now. And I know I'm not making it look particularly easy. It was a lot harder than that. I tried a couple of different methods to get the couple of mil gap between them. First of all, on this one, I wedged a screw between to hold them up. But in the end, I just put a screw at one corner and then tilted the board a few mil and redid all of the screws. It was the only way I could figure out of doing it. Held them in place with the clamps wherever I possibly could. And, oh yeah, kept looking behind and, yeah, double checking to find out exactly where the studs were because I hadn't marked them. Still, we made progress. Okay, so just to give you a look of what this is like from the inside, we've got the sheeting up. I haven't cut out the windows yet. I'm going to do all of that just before we wrap it. The reason I'm showing you this now is because I'm going to say you need to plan ahead. Before I put this wall up, I should have bought the OSB sheeting and put it behind it, because getting it round is now going to be really awkward. Anyway, this is going to be the next one I'm going to sheet, then that one, and we're going to do it all in the same way as we've done this. 6 to 8 inches on every single stud, and I screwed really well on the outside of the window because that's going to be the bit that might lift if I haven't got the screws in the right place. So, 1 down, 3 to go. Can't stress enough actually how useful these quick grip clamps came in, because I haven't shown you every single board going up and I don't think that's useful or interesting at this time, but little times where you've got a stud and you can just hold the board up with one of these squeeze clamps, they are priceless. Right, we've got 3 out of the 4 walls done, and you can already hear there's a bit of an echo going on, which is a great feeling because it's starting to feel a little bit like a room, a shed, a workshop, whatever you want to call it. Now, This wall, you'd have noticed when it went up, I didn't cut. I started off with a full piece of plywood from the bottom. Problem with that is it doesn't join on the noggins. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put a couple of extra ones in. This wall will have most of my tools on it. It's going to be easier to find a stud. I have left a little bit of the OSB proud at the top. I will trim that down. You won't even see that, but I'll trim it down. Give yourself a little bit of leeway with everything you're doing with this, because if it's your first time like me, you're going to need it. I've got 2 to 3 mil gaps between the OSB. One little tip here, if you miss that, if you have the boards and they are snug, very carefully set the depth of your circular saw to the sheet depth, don't go any deeper, and then just run it along the joint really slowly, really carefully, and the kerf of the blade will leave you enough leeway to have the gap for the wood movement between your boards. One thing that I was really worried about before I started popping these OSB sheets up was the door and the slanting roof above it. I didn't think that I would get it right first time. So what I did, and you didn't see the first bit, but I just put normal square boards on the bottom, and then I cut an angle across this top board. It isn't as perfect as it looks because I'm planning on using a flush trim router across the top later. Give yourself that little bit of margin and you can always trim it down later. You can't add to it. Oh yeah, and sometimes it's easier to reach in from the top and put those studs in right at the top, especially if you've got uneven ground for your ladder. Remember to walk off really satisfied. Oh yeah, throw your cap down and realise that you've made something that looks a bit like a wooden prison. I just want to show you what I've done this morning, because I was going to say these were completely done, but then I slept on it and I realised that I'd made one mistake. And until I fix that mistake, I can't put the roof on. I'll show you. I did not have this stud on this wall on both sides when I finished yesterday. I've just cut the noggin and I've slotted an extra one in and put extra noggins down the side of it, because when I put the rafters on, I'm going to match them up with the studs because they match the studs on the front wall. I'm going to cantilever about a 300mm overhang over the door, and for that I need to rest smaller rafters going outwards. If my last rafter going that way sat on this wall, then I'm going to have a real problem with the support for the overhang. So my last rafter will sit here, so then all of the cantilever rafters, if you like, will sit actually on this side wall, and that will give them a lot more support. Although it's only a small overhang, it'll hold it up really nicely. It's a little bit high, but we're going to deal with that down the line. So we're just about to start on the roof rafters. Now, they're going to be quite a heavy job, and I would suggest at this stage, if there's 2 of you, this is the time to get the second person in to help. Before we can do that, I've set up a string across here to do the same thing we did on the bottom wall. We're basically going to check that it, in the middle, it's not either bowing in or bowing out, because we're pretty sure that we're good for the rest of it. We've just got to stick our blocks in and see if the middle one gets pulled out. If it does, which I'm really hoping it doesn't, if it does, we then just need to pull the wall in or out using a brace to the floor. Referencing that just off the top plate, you can see that the string is taut when it leaves the wood, and then it's taut when it meets the next block of wood. You see I'm slightly off, I mean, a couple of mil on that one. The wall just needs to be pulled in ever so slightly. Now, I could do it with a brace or I could do it by putting the rafter in, but the problem with putting the rafter in is, if I put the rafter in here and pull this wall back, I could be pulling that wall in, and I definitely don't want that. So what I'm going to do is just screw a piece of wood down to the base here and then pull the wall out using a brace, and then put a couple of rafters on, and that will then hold everything together. But I know I've repeated this quite a lot, but this is definitely a job you need a second person for, because there's no way you can put enough pressure on the top of that wall to drag it in even 2 or 3 mil and hold it there while screwing in the bottom of the brace that you're holding it in place with, because it's just not going to work. Although, I got lucky. And a thumbs up on the back wall. Yes. With the wall squared up, this is one of the rafters cut to size. It's 2x7. There's tables online that will tell you how far each one of the sizes of timbers will go to span the gap. Now, this is absolutely the minimum depth I could go to get across the gap, and the reason I've done it at the bare minimum is because otherwise the height of the building would be above what I'm permitted to do, so this keeps it below the 2.5 metres that I'm allowed to go up to. We're going to have to put noggins in as well once we've finished at a midway point. All of this will be covered when we're actually in the building, because we're going to be putting soundproofing and insulation within the roof. We've also got these angle brackets. We're going to have 2 on either side where it meets the front and back wall. It's quite a pricey way to go, but it's belt and braces. I didn't want to hang the rafters inside the wall. I wanted to sit them bang on the top and pop these in. Now, you've got a huge amount of holes with these. I'm going to fill them with nails and put a couple of screws in as well. Because there's such a low gradient angle on the front to the back, so we've only got a 10 centimetre rise, I don't feel the need to be cutting any bird mouth grooves out of these, anything like that. I'm just going to sit them on the top, then use these, and I think they're going to be absolutely rock solid, so long as I keep them up above the main studs. 15 of them, and this is the heaviest. You can see the tightness of the grain. It's going to be the heaviest, so I thought I'd start with the hardest, because why wouldn't you? This is to test that I've cut it the right length before I then just cut all the rest and get them up there. Maximum effort. Now, I'm not going to turn it on its side to start with. I'm just going to leave it flat because it's more stable, and I'm just going to go round the back, round the front, push it to where it should be, check that I haven't undercut it, because that would be a real pain. When you're cutting these, if you're going to put one on the front, running along all of the tips of these, and one on the back running along all the tips, bear that in mind when with the length you're cutting, because you're going to need to take off 2 widths of a 2x7. So take that off, then cut them to size, because you're going to add that piece of timber on to make it flush front and back. You'll see what I mean when we get there. I found the easiest way for doing the rafters was just to batch them out. They're all the same length, cut them all at once, and then just take them up in 3s, 4s, 5s, groups of whatever you're comfortable with, and then spend the time up on the roof just nailing and screwing them down in those groups of 4 or 5. And you're going to see some pretty sketchy ladder techniques as well. Please don't copy. So the first job to do is just to mark where the stud is, and you'll see that I've marked the overhang as well on the actual rafter itself. Marked it twice because I got it wrong the first time. Then these handy angle brackets, get 2 screws bottom, 2 screws on the side, and then fill all the holes with these square twist nails. And the square twist nails are unbelievable. They're very short, but they don't pull out. And then once I'd done the one end, I did the other end and moved the next rafter into place and rinse and repeat. It's just a really easy process. If you have 2 ladders, that's going to make your life a lot easier than carrying them. And if you have 2 of any of the other tools, you could always leave them at one side of the building and come back to them. That's also going to make your life a lot easier. But having the Pica pencil in my pocket, it sounds like a sales technique, but it's not. Having that there, knowing that I couldn't lose it, made life a lot easier. Because I was always marking a stud, I was always marking the end of a timber, I was using it a lot. And like I just showed you, that's 1 down, 14 more to go. I'm not going to show you every single nail and screw, but this is just a sneak peek of what it looks like once they're all done and in place, and it gives it a serious amount of strength. You can't move those rafters. Now this shot makes it look like a really glorious sunny day, and I'm only halfway through the rafters. When I did the second half, it turned on me, and that's why, unfortunately, the picture you see is with a tarpaulin over it. So we're on to day 7, I believe, of working on this, and I just wanted to take a stop and to go on a more personal feedback couple of minutes with you guys and say, if there's people watching this thinking, oh, I could do this myself, you absolutely can. I watched some videos a few months ago and thought, like that this is something that maybe I can put my hands to. But what I will say is take moments like this, because I've just put a tarpaulin over the roof, and suddenly, from being a carcass, from a skeleton of a building, it's become a room. And I know I've got a long way left to go, but take moments like this, because these are the moments that spur you on past the hard bits, onto the next hard bit. And if you don't stop and take that pleasure in what you've done, then I think it's easy to burn out in one of these sorts of builds, especially if you're doing it every single day. On a physical note, as I say, day 7, that's 7 days of manual labour, working pretty much on my own. I've had some help lifting and carrying some of the things down to the garden, but actual build, I started to get the aches and pains and to start to get very tired yesterday earlier than I have on other days. Because I was lifting the great big rafters above my head, all 14 or 15 of them. Something to bear in mind is pacing yourself. And if you can spread it out a little bit more, if you can take a rest day in between, then you'll make less mistakes and you won't hurt as much. I'm down here today talking to you because, well, it's going to give me another 5 minutes rest before I start putting in all of the noggins. I've also realised that when I did the side walls with the windows, I did a mirror image to give it a better symmetry. And for that, there are 2 places where the studs don't meet up with a rafter. I'm just going to put an extra stud in there just for peace of mind. Spreads the weight over the window. To stop the rafters twisting, I'm going to put noggins straight down the middle. Now I confess, I'm not sure how accurate you have to be for the centre, but I did measure every single rafter and mark on the centre point, and then batched out all of the noggins. Now, with it being me, each rafter is not an equal distance apart, so I did measure them from the rafters themselves. Don't measure from the middle, because it might have bowed in a bit. Measure from the ends, so that you can force the middle to the width of the ends, if that makes sense, and then the noggin will hold it in place. As with every part of the noggins that I've done so far, all of the framing I've done is just 2 100mm screws going into each end of the noggin through the joist itself, and that'll hold it all into place and stop it from twisting. Now the video here is not going to show you the full extent of how annoying these overhangs were. Because of the 5 or 4mm that I'd gone too high on the wall, I had to actually score it and cut a groove out of each one of these overhangs. As you can see, I'm marking it down. I had to cut out a 3 or 4mm groove so that it would sit flush with the top of the rafter. What I didn't know is the rafter had a slight twist in it, and if I could go back and do it all again, I would do it slightly differently and straighten out that rafter, maybe even replace it with a straight one, because the roof, well, you'll see in future videos, has a very slight tip on it that maybe I'll only be the only person that notices, but I do notice it. Anyway, I cut all the grooves out, put all of the overhang pieces up onto the roof, and then, again, like everything else, it's just 2 screws straight through the joist, and then 2 angle brackets per overhang piece, and they are solid as a rock. Check for square. Pretend it's square, carry on. Now I think it's only fair that I do tell you why I didn't correct the very slight slant that the roof's going to have at this point. It is only probably 1-2mm by the end of one of these rafter pieces that it dips, and to be honest with you, I'd hammered in well over 500 nails. I'd put in so many screws, and in all honesty, I just wanted to get the roof done and get it watertight, because it was at that stage that I was just exhausted and wanted to get it finished. So I'll live with the slight angle of the roof. Some of it can be hidden with fascias anyway, as you'll find out in a later video. Next up, we've got to tidy up all of those ends, as I discussed earlier. I'm just going to run some more 2x7s across the front. And these handy little brackets that I put up is just a block of 2x4. And I just screw it straight under a couple of the rafters so that I can balance the beam on there at one end and then screw it into place on the other. Only thing to note with this is going to be the same height as the rafters, and if it's not, then you need to get a clamp up on it and really pull it square with the rafter that you're screwing it into. That is the sketchiest of ladder practices ever. Please don't copy that. This is not a how-to video for using a ladder. Anyway, put it on all 4 sides, square it off, and when you're using that clamp technique, as I'll show you in a minute, do it with lots and lots of leeway, as in don't screw the rafter in next to it, because you can't bend the plank as much as you want to. Do the far ends first, get them leveled up, and then straighten up any that need straightening up before you put too many screws in. I hope that makes sense. And this is what I mean by the clamp. So clamp the board itself up to the rafter that it's joining onto, give it a squeeze to straighten it, and then just pop in 2 really long 100mm screws, and it'll hold it all into place. You have a little bit of wiggle room with this. And then show how much you've enjoyed the job. Yeah, just like that. And there it is, we got there. It was exhausting, and I wish I could show you all of the rafters up in line. However, with the weather turning on us and it's starting to rain, I've had to throw a tarp over the whole building. I only just made it in time. Don't worry, in the coming videos, we're going to be putting a full roof on it, and we've got windows and doors to put in as well. So there's a lot more steps we need to put in before this is finished. If you've enjoyed the build, please consider subscribing. There's a lot of hard work that's going into it so far, not just for the building, but also to get the videos out on time. If the next one's ready, I'll pop it up there. If not, I'll stick a video up for you that I think you're going to like. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you over there.